Hey there, I'm Rob Timmerman, Regional Prevention Director with the state's prevention system. And this is Logan Reid, the Prevention Director at the Southwest Behavioral Health Center. We're here in Logan's music room because we wanted to do something different for our presentation. We were asked to present on policy, and we're really excited to give you some information, but what we wanted to do was make this a little bit different than what we've all become accustomed to sitting in front of our computers having a Zoom type presentation or conference. So that's why we're here.
Yeah, and we were asked specifically to talk about policy work, and so we did a phone call kind of chatting back and forth about what we might say and what points we wanted to make, and we kind of came down to a couple of main objectives, one of which is that we wanted to dispel kind of the fear that we often feel about doing policy work. But we also wanted to provide some specific tools about how coalitions and prevention specialists can do policy work. And specifically, we wanted to make the point that prevention work requires, or really good prevention policy work requires consistency, meaning that it's not a once a year when we're in session kind of a thing, and it might require compromise. And so we were talking about how we might make our different points, and Rob started bringing up these great analogies as we were talking about this, and that's kind of what brought us here. One of the analogies we were talking about was music, and before long we thought, well, maybe the way that we should do this just to make it different is to go somewhere and talk about these analogies where we could actually kind of bring them to life. And so here we are in my music room.
This is awesome, Logan. You've got so much cool stuff in here. I love the guitars hanging, the drums, the bongos, the drum kit. You've got so much cool things. I like music, and I would say I appreciate music, but I don't know music. In fact, in college, I worked my way through college working at a radio station, and I just did promotions and marketing, and I enjoyed what I did, but I didn't love music as much as the radio DJs did. I've always had an appreciation for music, and even now as I grow old, I still like to listen, but I don't know music.
Have you ever taken lessons for anything?
I took drum lessons.
You did?
Maybe like 6 or 7 lessons.
You're gonna sit down at the drum kit for sure then.
I could beat out a couple of tunes, but I was never really good at it.
Yeah.
Even though I'm not good at it, I still like it. But like you've got a talent for it. You know music. You play music. You've performed music. You've done all that sort of things. And that's kind of what we're talking about is I come from a background of I enjoy music, I like it, but I don't know music. And the analogy kind of gets into same with policymakers. Oftentimes, we are the ones that may be the experts, or at least we know a little bit more than a policymaker might know. And we have the ability to share what we know and get into a conversation with someone they may not understand where we're coming from, but still wants to make sure that our kids and our vulnerable populations are safe and healthy.
Yeah, I think that sometimes there is this fear that we have that maybe I don't know enough about this topic to really be able to go in to my mayor or go to a senator and talk about a particular issue. Or maybe even it's the exact opposite. Maybe we have a city councilwoman who is really involved with prevention policy and seems to know a lot about it, and we think, well, I can't go and talk to that person. And I think the analogy that we were talking about is that just as we were chatting, we naturally in our chit chat, we started talking about music, and it brought up this point that we don't have to be on the same level in order to talk about music and talk about what we like about music or what experiences we have. Even though, I started taking violin lessons when I was 6 years old. That's what my mom wanted me to start with. And so I started at 6 years old taking violin lessons. I started taking guitar lessons when I was 10 years old. Just because you haven't taken guitar lessons doesn't mean that we can't talk about music. You can't appreciate a guitar. And I think it's the same way with our policymakers. We don't have to be on the same page in order to start a conversation. Just like with music, we don't have to like the exact same genre or have the same favorite band in order for us to be able to have a conversation about music. Do you have a favorite genre or a favorite band?
I do. If I were to pick something, it would be classic rock.
Like that's
And
what you listen to more than anything else?
that's what's in the car if I'm listening to music in the car.
Yeah.
If I'm working in the yard, yeah, classic rock.
Is there like a band? Are you like, you have a go-to band or artist, or just anything in the realm of classic rock?
Favorite band, probably Led Zeppelin. But I do like to mix in a little old school hip hop every once in a while to bob my head.
All right, so you're a little more eclectic than just classic rock.
Well, yeah, I mean, jazz even. I'll throw in some jazz and listen to some jazz, but
That probably comes from your like drumming background.
maybe so. Just carrying a beat, I guess. Yeah. I mean, I kind of like that. The musical trio that's happening at wedding receptions, I can respect that. What about you, though? So what's your favorite genre?
I don't even know if I can pick one. I mean, classic rock is in there. I tell people all the time when they ask me this question that 50s rock is what I never get sick of. You know, like I'll go through phases where I'm listening to all different genres. I'll get stuck on one genre and I'll listen to it for a long time, but then I'll kind of get bored with it and I'll move to something else. But the one that I never get bored with is like 50s rock and roll.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about you play in a band? You have a couple of bands. You've played all over southwestern Utah.
That makes it sound cooler than it is, but okay.
What do you play with your band?
Like what kind of music do we play? So I play in one where we play mostly country and that old time rock and roll, like 50s type rock. And then another one is a lot more rock, like even a little bit harder rock, but we also play a little bit of everything. That was kind of the idea of that band, is that if we want to play a reggae song, we play a reggae song. And if we want to play a really slow classic country ballad, then we do. But then we also throw in some pretty heavy rock as well.
That's so cool. Yeah. What does it feel like to perform? I don't know what it feels like to perform. What does it feel like to perform?
Well, so when you get past like the nerves and the fear of performing in front of people, one of the things that I really like about it is specifically the band. You know, I don't play by myself. I don't get up with a guitar and a microphone and just me. I like playing with the band when you've got a rhythm guitar and then you bring in a bass line and you bring in a lead guitar and you have the drum kit and you've got harmonies and backup vocals. It gets really fun. Like at some point you kind of connect with everybody in the band and just like making music live right then in the moment is really cool. That's what I like about it, I guess.
What happens when you and a bandmate maybe have a different perspective on the music that you're gonna play or the style that you're gonna carry into a show? What do you do?
I mean, that's called being in a band. I mean, that's what happens when you bring different people with, we all love music, which is the nice thing. That's what we have to connect us. So even though we might like different genres or different styles, it's the fact that we like music that gives us something in common and we can build on that. So, I mean, this is, this band that I was just talking about, there are 4 members of the band, and I think if you asked each of the 4 members what is your favorite genre of music, they would each give you a different genre. Like each one of us would say we like a different genre the best. That doesn't mean that we can't get together and play, though. It does mean that there's going to be differences of opinion. You know, there might be a song that the rest of the band wants to play that I don't really want to play, but the rest of the band wants to play it, so we're going to play it. More specifically, you've got to figure out how to even have those conversations, talk about this is what I want to do with the song versus this other way that we're doing it. We run into this all the time when we're writing songs, when we're writing music, and you start talking about lyrics and somebody has one idea or one direction that they want to go with the lyrics and somebody has a different one, and we kind of have to figure out how to come together and make a decision. And what I've realized is that happens easier and easier. Like the longer that we've been together as a band, the easier it gets to work through all that stuff. Like we get to a point where I don't know, the relationship has arrived at this place where it's easy for us to have those conversations, and it's easy for us to say, I don't like that, or I do like that. And I've even found that I start to like some of that other music. Like this one guy, I've been playing together with him for probably 10 years, and we have two very different favorite styles of music that we like to play. What he listens to, very different than what I listen to when I'm driving down the road. Or at least that's how it was 10 years ago. Like now I think both of us have kind of influenced the other to the point that I like a lot of what he's listening to. And I think he would probably say the same thing. We've kind of rubbed off on each other, and our tastes have aligned more as we've played together for the last 10 years.
And that didn't just happen overnight.
No. I mean, it takes work. It takes 10 years worth of playing together.
You had to develop a rapport with each other. You had to begin to understand each other's perspective and see how sometimes those perspectives intertwined to be able to be on the same page. And sometimes I imagine you're not on the same page.
No, sometimes we're not.
And that's okay for your band. You don't break up. You don't do the Beatles thing and one of you shoots and starts smashing guitars.
No, we don't have enough money to be able to smash guitars. Maybe it would be different if we were actually like the Beatles and we were making lots of money, but we don't make any, so we got to figure out how to make it work.
So a couple of the points that I just heard are it takes time to develop that relationship. Time together, time playing together, time spent trying to understand one another's perspectives. Not that one person's going to be right all the time, but just kind of blending what those perspectives are so that you're cohesive and so that you can get up on stage and perform or produce a piece of music that people are going to enjoy and listen to. Kind of a lot like coalition work when we're talking about policy, right? It takes time. Sometimes even within your coalition, it takes time and perspectives coming together to be able to, as a cohesive coalition, go and speak with policymakers about what could be effective and helpful for your community.
Yeah, and I like, you pointed out that understanding piece. I think that's been really important when, if I come back to the music thing. Maybe there's somebody in the band that likes a type of music that it just doesn't really speak to me. But what's interesting is that when we start talking about it and they start telling me why they like it, what it is about the music that really draws them to it. Sometimes we get talking about the lyrics and we talk about the history of the band and all these different things that make them really like this type of music. And then that's what I find starts pushing me more towards it. Like all of a sudden I'm a little bit more open to it because my understanding has changed. It's not just this snap judgment or opinion. I understand their perspective. I see where they're coming from, and now all of a sudden I like the music. And I think that, connecting this back to policy work, oftentimes we forget about that. We have policymakers who are doing one thing, and we have prevention research that says we should do another thing, and we're just butting heads rather than actually understanding each other. And if we sat down and talked about it, we would probably start to align a little bit more, just like my experience with bandmates.
So this gets back into the topic of relationships and how you build a relationship and how you build trust. Because once you have trust with someone, then when you're seeing things differently, you may be able to work on compromise. A lot of times prevention policy work is compromise.
Yeah. And with that trust, I think that's an important thing for us to explore. I just explained that with my bandmates, a lot of that trust has come through spending time with each other and playing together and working through issues and talking about why we like what we like. How do you do that with policymakers? If you're a member of a coalition and you're wanting to develop a stronger relationship with a policymaker, what do you do?
Okay, so let's talk about how to build a relationship. And I've got some quick tips and techniques and things like that we can do to develop that relationship so that we can be better in our policy work with our policymakers, right? So one of the first things that I wanted to talk about is developing a relationship one person at a time or an individual at a time. Even if it's coming from a group or a collective like a coalition, I'm working with you as a policymaker one-on-one. We want to make sure that we're giving the time to the development of the relationship that it needs so that we can build that trust.
So even though we might have a group of coalition members going in to meet with a policymaker, you're saying the idea is focusing on building a relationship with that person as a person.
Exactly. Okay. Let's not target 5 different policymakers and within the next month we're going to develop a relationship within the next month. That's not how relationships work. Another thing we want to do is we want to be likable and personable. If I'm the representative from our coalition going in to speak with a policymaker or shooting a policymaker an email or a phone call or a text, we want to be personable and likable. Another thing we want to remember is that policymakers are people too. We got to assume that they want to develop a relationship with us on that same level. A likable, personal relationship.
Well, and I think that's it. If we remember that, then it's going to make it a lot easier, because I mentioned that fear a lot of times. I mean, I still remember when I first got into this job, the first time that my boss said, you're going to go to Washington, D.C., and you're going to talk to some senators and congressmen and women. And I was thinking, that's not what I signed up for, and I don't know how to do that. And I remember being so scared about that, because you sometimes put them up on this pedestal and you forget that they are people. They are people from their community who wanted to, I'm assuming they got into this because they wanted to make a difference in their community with policy. And they're just people. And I still remember the first time I went in to meet with Congressman Matheson. And he walked in and he had on this nice suit, but he was wearing these old worn cowboy boots. And he sat on his desk and just started talking to us. And I was like, oh, he's a guy from Southern Utah, just like me. And anyway, I think that the more we remember that they're people and they're open to having a relationship with us, it takes away a lot of that fear.
Logan, this is perfect modeling. You just spoke with me on a personal level. You related a story. The other part of that is to ask questions. Let them know that you are interested in them. Not necessarily just about who they are as a policymaker, but about what they're interested in, about their family, about where they went to school, about what they do for their job. Get to know them on a one-on-one level.
Maybe that question about why they decided to run for an office or to be in the position that they're in. That might be a great question just to break the ice and start to get to know them and why they got into this.
Another thing that we got to make sure that we do is accept people for who they are. We're asking them questions. We're getting information back about what they enjoy, what they like. Sometimes that comes with things that they don't like. We have to be able to understand that before we're able to move further on our developing relationship, plus how we can use that in the future if we need to when we're asking them specifically about policy. So it's kind of this give and take. You may really connect with them on some things, you may not connect with them on others.
Which is okay, right?
Totally okay. So just a little bit earlier, you mentioned fear. That fear of rejection. Logan, I'm standing here in spandex doing a presentation.
And I'm wearing a shirt that does not fit me, which is why I had to leave it unbuttoned.
It looks like it may have fit 15 years ago.
Yeah, maybe even like 6 years ago, but not today.
So we all come into things with a little bit of fear, and that's okay. We need to get over that fear. We don't need to get rid of that fear, but just be able to deal with it in talking to a policymaker. Policy work is hard and it's difficult, especially if we know that the policy that we are going to ask for is a difficult policy, whether it be an alcohol issue or a vaping issue. A lot of the times when we're talking about vaping, it is a business and a public safety issue, and we need to find somewhere in the middle that we are going to agree with that policymaker. We might be fearful of that going into it.
Well, and one of the things that I hear you saying is that we need to be okay with getting a little bit more personal. I mean, I think that was kind of one of our goals here is people may have seen us do presentations before, but you weren't wearing biker shorts and I wasn't wearing a shirt that didn't fit. Like our goal here was to like bring this down to ground level a little bit, be a little bit more personal, share a little bit about ourselves and our interests. And I mean, our hope is that maybe this will kind of facilitate a connection, but it's the same idea with policymakers, is we can't be afraid to go in and actually be personal and get to know them and let them get to know us.
We want that connection, and that connection is what's going to help us as we work on our policy issue for our community.
Yeah.
Another thing that I wanted to mention is the consistency of relationships. We all have those friends that we maybe haven't seen for 20 years, and we can pick up the friendship right where we left it. But with most people, we need to put some effort into our relationship, or else we kind of forget about each other and maybe fall away from each other in the relationships that we built.
Yeah, which is, I think, one of the places that I really struggled, especially early on, and I think sometimes I still kind of fail with this, is that we get really excited about doing policy work when there's a specific issue. You know, we're all of a sudden working on a park ordinance on tobacco, and so all of a sudden we're trying to jump into these relationships with our city council members, or state legislature is in session, so all of a sudden we're really excited about policy work, and for a whole year we haven't been doing anything, but we expect to just jump in and have that relationship. And again, I've made this mistake so many times, but I think one of the things that we have to get past in prevention work is this idea that we can do policy work every once in a while. If we're going to build those relationships, it has to be this constant, consistent effort to interact with and talk with policymakers so that we have that relationship. And then when the city council meeting comes up or the state legislature is in session, all of a sudden it's so much more easier to jump in and have a conversation because it hasn't been a year since we talked to this person. It was just last month. And so it's kind of natural to say, hey, I got something that I want to talk to you about.
And the other side too, if we've built a relationship and we're keeping in touch with that person, there may be a thought or a question that person has that they'll reach out to us because we're developing that two-way relationship. They may be thinking about a policy, or they may have a policy on an upcoming agenda and they want some perspective. Then they're more likely to reach out to us to provide that perspective.
Yeah, especially if, you know, the coalition was just here last month talking about an alcohol issue. When an alcohol issue comes up for them 3 weeks later, they're going to think about the coalition. They're going to look to you as being experts to reach out to when they have something going. And so it's no longer us always trying to get them to listen. I mean, imagine that perfect scenario where they're coming to us and saying, tell us, what does the research say? What does the science say?
I think that's a really good point. We know prevention. On whatever level we know prevention on, we may be the expert that they're looking for. Even if we're just a new coalition member, or if we're a seasoned prevention specialist, we know prevention probably a little bit more than that policymaker does. They may look to us as an expert. And again, it doesn't matter our level of expertise because it's all about the perspective that we will provide for them when they need that perspective.
Because even if you are not an expert in prevention, you do know your community. And so you have something that you can share with them about your concerns in your community and what they can do to help you.
I think that's a really important piece. The understanding of your community with the prevention that you do know will help as a policymaker reaches out.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not the whole story when we're talking about relationships. You mentioned it earlier when you were talking about your band, and sometimes when you don't see eye to eye with your bandmates.
Yeah, because even though you have that strong relationship, which makes it a lot easier to have conversations, there's still going to be times when you have a difference of opinion or you don't understand where the other person is coming from. And I think that's one of the reasons why a really important part of doing quality policy work is considering compromise and being willing to make some compromise. which has actually led us to why you're dressed like this, which I just love. I love that you have kept the helmet on this whole time. So we actually had another analogy where we were going to talk about that compromise. So let's go grab your bike. Maybe we'll find a good backdrop and we'll continue from there.
All right, let's go.
Did you hit your mark?
Pretty good. Pretty close.
Do you feel more comfortable wearing this outfit now that you've got your bike?
Outside on a bike, I feel much more comfortable in spandex. It's a little different than being in a house talking on camera than it is outside. So this is better.
You look good.
This is better. So the whole reason I am on a bike is because we have a couple more analogies.
Yeah. Which was, I mean, this was one, we were just talking about what are the points that we want to make, and I think you just naturally started telling this story, and I was like, this should be what we do. Let's just get together and we'll tell these stories. So what was the analogy that you made?
Okay, so obviously no big surprise, I ride a bike. I get that other people don't ride bikes and maybe have a different perspective of bike riders and cyclists in general, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a whole bunch of different road usage arguments that happen all the time. I'm on a couple of Facebook groups that talk about safety issues. One group the other day was talking about a cyclist that had been injured because they'd gone off the road. Someone had not followed the 3-foot law that we have here in the state of Utah to allow cyclists on the road. Oftentimes, and I've even been riding, where a car or a truck will yell at me for being on the road and be frustrated that I am on the road. It happens all the time. So the analogy that we started talking about was, I am a cyclist, but there may be a policymaker that I need to get in touch with that's on the side of, or on the other side of the road biking and cyclists using roads and cyclist safety concepts.
Maybe they're of the opinion that roads are for motor vehicles and you shouldn't be riding your bike on the road.
There are many of those. For example, I know that right now there's a lot of debate going on about road usage in the state of Utah, and the policymakers are always talking about electric vehicles, and electric vehicles are using our roads, but they're not buying gas and therefore they're not paying taxes for road improvement. Same thing with a bicycle. I've heard the argument before that bicyclists shouldn't be allowed to use our roads because we're not paying for the improvement on them if they need improvement.
Right. So what happens if you, who are a cyclist, you ride your bike to work every day, you're going in to meet with a policymaker that you know is kind of on the other side of that issue? How do you deal with that?
So this is a really good point that we're trying to make. Sometimes we have to lay aside our own personal beliefs for the greater good of the community that we're trying to serve with respect to policies that are related to prevention. There may be alcohol policies that we need to work on with a legislator or with a policymaker in our own community that we may not see eye to eye on other issues like cycling, like education, or anything like that. Sometimes we need to lay those things aside so that we can work on policy issues for the betterment of our community.
So maybe even though you might be passionate about this, the policymaker might be passionate about this, when you go in, you understand, I'm not going to bring up cycling. I'm not going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about what the coalition is focusing on and maybe steer clear of that other issue.
Exactly. There can be things that we can set aside so that we can reach a better agreement on the specific policy.
I saw this exact thing this last legislative session with some of our staff who they were talking with a policymaker on their own time about another issue that they were really concerned about. And then I was sending them in to talk about a prevention issue. And they were really good at exactly what you just described. Even though they had been having conversations on this other issue, they left that aside and they went in to talk about this prevention thing. And it can probably be pretty hard to do that, but they did a really good job with it.
Sometimes it's hard, but it's necessary.
I think another, on the flip side of this, another analogy we can make with this is that I've been that person you were just describing, right? The person who gets frustrated with cyclists on the road. I think it stemmed from, I had this experience. I was driving up Highway 18, which is this narrow mountain highway here in southern Utah. And I came around a bend and there's a cyclist that was, out in the road because there was nowhere else for them to be. And I'm going 65 and all of a sudden there's a cyclist and I didn't have enough time to slow down, which meant I was going to have to pass them. But coming the other direction was this 18-wheeler hauling hay. And so I couldn't really get over into that other lane, but I've got the cyclist right here. And the whole experience really scared me. I mean, I ended up kind of going right in between them, but I was worried that I was going to clip the cyclist or that I was going to hit this 18-wheeler. And I think out of that fear came this anger at why does this cyclist have to be riding on the road? I kind of was in this box of the road is for me. I'm in a vehicle and a motor vehicle, and so obviously I should get precedence. I held on to that opinion for a long time. I was that person who, felt like the roads are for motor vehicles until that one time when I was riding my bike and I'm over on the shoulder until all of a sudden the shoulder ended and it was unexpected. And so I had no choice but to kind of go out on the road. I know that it made people mad. They had to slow down and go the speed I was going until they could get to a place where they could get around me. But all of a sudden my perspective changed. All of a sudden I understood what it was like to be on the other side of that coin and to be somebody who I had to get to work. All I had was the bike at the time. And so I think my perspective really changed and I kind of understood both sides of the issue. So maybe another analogy here too is that even when there is an issue, a prevention issue, where we have differing opinions, we might have to be willing to compromise like each other. We might have to be able to compromise and find some sort of a middle ground through experience and maybe through talking with prevention people and coalition people like I did. Policymakers can change their perspective. They can come to understand what we're explaining, and maybe we can find a way to meet in the middle a little bit.
That is exactly the point that we're trying to make, Logan, is that there are often times where we can find middle ground. Perspectives change, communities evolve, thoughts evolve, and we need to make sure that, like we've talked about earlier, that we have the relationship with the policymaker so that we can meet that policymaker where compromise happens.
It's hard though. I mean, how many times have I been the worst culprit of this, where I get really passionate about an issue, I've got the science and the research to back up my position, and so I don't want to give. I don't want to compromise. I want to stick to what I know about this and what the research says. And I think maybe one of the things that we're getting at is that there's probably going to be a requirement for us to give a little bit. We might need to be willing to compromise and understand that because somebody on the other side doesn't have all of that information and all of that research and 15 years worth of working in this field and developing a passion for it, maybe we should be a little more accepting of them having a different opinion. And we got to try harder to find that middle ground. All right, so we've talked about the importance of building a relationship, making connections, being personal and connecting with people on a personal level. We've talked about how we're probably going to have to be willing to compromise and maybe even be looking for opportunities to compromise. And that third piece that we mentioned is that this has to be a continual process. It can't be a once a year or when that one policy issue comes up that we're now concerned about, we need to start thinking about ways that we can continually be building these relationships and looking for ways to compromise with our policymakers. And I think that maybe the best way to do that is to actually come up with a plan. Like as a coalition or as a prevention group, sitting down, identifying key policymakers that we want to work with. Maybe we're looking at the community level, the county level, the state level, the federal. Maybe it's all four of those, but identifying who are the people that we want to connect with, and then coming up with a 12-month plan of what we're going to do to make those connections. And one of my favorite pieces of advice is to find some really easy, fun, and positive interactions to have with policymakers. So for example, maybe you say in August, we're going to take a group of coalition members and have a meeting with a policymaker where we're not going to ask them for anything. We're just going to tell them about some of the great things that we're doing in their community. And it can be a short meeting, and we even just be very open and say, we're not here to ask you for anything. We just wanted you to know, here's some of the things that we're doing in your community. I think another thing is to, maybe this is even the next month, you go in for a meeting and maybe this time you are asking them for something, but you're asking them for something really easy, really simple, like something that's not going to be a lot of work for them to do, but will give them a chance to actually work with you and to help you and give you something. Give me an idea, like what are some simple things that we might ask a policymaker that is not going to be hard for them to follow through with?
Really simple things can be around demographics in their own district, the district that they represent.
Oh, like asking them for information on demographics?
Oftentimes you can even say, hey, can you get your intern to give us information on how many families are in your district? How many alcohol licensees are in your district? That may give them a good opportunity too to learn more about their district. If they find that they're in a district with a lot of alcohol outlets, then you're making a double point there. You're making a point that your district may have too many alcohol licenses.
Yeah, that actually reminds me, I've seen, I didn't do it, but I've seen somebody else that was really good with this, where they actually asked a policymaker, we're getting close to this next session. Is there anything specific that you're focusing on that you would like us to know something about? Like they just asked them, tell us about a policy that you're writing that you would like me to know more about. And the policymaker did, and it had nothing to do with prevention, but there was something that they were very passionate about, and they got excited when they were asked to tell this group of community members why they're writing this particular policy. And that might be an easy way to kind of facilitate some discussion going back and forth.
It can be the give and take. It's, I am going to do something for you because we've got this relationship now, so that you can do something for us when we need it.
Yeah. I think another really easy thing is to every once in a while send some information, just an email or a text where you share a science article about a prevention issue that you've been interested in, especially if, let's say that one month you go in and you tell them, hey, here's a really cool thing that we're doing in our community as an effort to prevent underage drinking. And then the next month, you send them an article about the impact of underage drinking on the adolescent brain. And you say, hey, this is something we talked to you about last month. I just wanted to pass this article on. Here's some current research on that topic. And if we come up with a plan where every single month we're doing something with these policymakers, sometimes it should be really simple and easy and not taking up a lot of their time. Other times it might be an actual meeting where we're getting to know them, inviting them to participate in something that we're doing. But if we were to actually do this every single month, imagine at the end of 12 months of this, when there actually is something that we want to talk to them about, how much easier that would be. We would already have this relationship going. There would be this precedent set of communicating with each other. And I think it would be so much easier at that point to then go in and say, okay, we want to talk to you about this policy issue.
I think you're right. Another thing that I thought of is highlight awesome things that your coalition is doing, as well as awesome things that are happening in the community that they may not have heard of or may not know or understand what's going on. Highlight the great things that the youth are doing in the community. If you've got a sterling scholar in your community, even if that student doesn't have anything to do with the coalition, let's make sure that the policymaker knows about that. You can even highlight the programs that you as a coalition are working on and say, hey, we've got 6 families right now enrolled in a Guiding Good Choices class. We just wanted to let you know of the awesome things that are happening with families in our community. It can be as simple as that. You can get complex and provide them much more detailed information if you need to, but just so you're having those touch points throughout the year and it's not just the one and done.
Well, and what about highlighting something great they've done? Like, what if we actually looked at the meeting minutes from the past few city council meetings and find something that we think is great for the community, and we send them an email saying, hey, I just wanted to thank you for doing this one thing for our community. I mean, talk about building a relationship, making somebody feel like you're paying attention to them and you actually care about what they're doing and you're grateful for them. I think that's going to make them want to reciprocate as well.
That's some social development strategy principles too.
We move into SDS. In summary here, what we're trying to do is really get outside the box. We've never done this kind of a presentation before, but the idea here was that we really didn't even prepare a lot about what we were going to talk about, because we wanted this to be more a discussion between the two of us in a setting that was different, that's not our office and that's not just us looking at a computer camera. And hopefully what we've done is given some simple analogies to highlight some really important concepts: building relationships, being willing to compromise, and looking at doing policy work constantly, rather than this being something that we just jump into every once in a while or when there's a specific need. We should be making this a part of what we do as prevention specialists, as coalition members, and finding ways to constantly be creating those relationships.
It's been fun. I think this is a fun way to do it. I'm gonna go ride.